An artillery unit, they stayed behind the lines, often monotonous duty, but relatively safe, until a move to a place called Firebase Tomahawk.
And I said, boy, I said, that's a bad spot up there. But that's where we end up going.
To a place already overrun twice by enemy forces.
On a rainy night, you could have drove a car through there and we'd never known it. You know, I mean, it was just, that wasn't no good at all.
During the rainstorm is when the two battalions of North Vietnamese Army regulars managed to get their way into our defenses.
What was that morning like on June 19th?
Pure hell.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up.
Yeah. I think that'll pretty much sum it up.
It seemed like it lasted forever. You didn't know who was who, really.
Really, about the only light we had was stuff was burning, and it seemed like everything we had was on fire.
Really, we had plenty of fires going.
Fires everywhere.
14 Americans died at Tomahawk, 5 from Bardstown.
Now, I do recall making a comment to Jody Hayden, who was one of my men, and his comment was something to the effect that this is going to kill the people back in Bardstown.
It shook our town up probably mentally and emotionally as much as anything in my lifetime, and I've seen it occur here.
The war ultimately claimed 16 Bardstown lives, 16 men from a town of 6,000, leaving it with a terrible legacy.
That was the highest percentage of casualties of any community in this country in any war.
Bardstown may be the only place on earth with 2 Vietnam memorials. The list of names led many to a longer list of questions and doubts.
After we come back, you really wonder what you was doing over there. I do.
We don't like to lose at nothing. And, you know, and they like losing that war the way we did. That just a waste of time.
I don't think our faith in government's near as strong. Blind faith in government is not there.
I could not say that our community still isn't patriotic, but I think we would take a longer look at how we feel about our involvement in another war.
46 years old.
Many of the former guardsmen, the survivors of Firebase Tomahawk, are still a tight-knit bunch 25 years later. They get together to talk about old cars and old times. They say it helps.
We meet every Wednesday night here, and we still talk about it, and it just keeps the whole town, the whole community close together.
We don't know of anybody here with the post-Vietnam syndrome.
While these men still don't fully understand their mission in Vietnam, they welcome word of better relations with the old enemy. That, too, may help the healing.
Hey, let the country get going again. 20 years or so. A long time ago. Let's go forward.
As we move forward with this special Coming to Terms, what lessons have we learned from Vietnam?
As a soldier, I did what I was required to do and asked to do.
I don't think any of us really regret being a Vietnam veteran.
It wasn't a waste of my time. It was all a part of life.
Thank you. This wall behind me and the more than 58,000 names inscribed upon it is one of the legacies of Vietnam. For a look at some of the others, return to CNN's Charles Bierbar.
There is a history lesson on this wall, Bernie. It is the lesson of the cost of war, and it is vivid to the generation that lived through it. But how do we explain it to our children? A generation born after the Vietnam War is just beginning to learn about it.
It's my duty to my country to do this. Why do you feel that? Why do you feel that you have this duty to your country?
Because he's a citizen.
America has done so and so for me.
You also have a duty to yourself to stay alive as long as you can.
Drafted. And duty in Vietnam looms. What to do? It's not a fate awaiting these 10th grade students at Montgomery Blair High School in Silver Spring, Maryland. There is no draft, no Vietnam War. But what did their fathers and uncles do? Teacher Dave Harrison's role-playing assignment helped the young draftee make a decision. There's the harsh reality.
You could get yourself hurt in Vietnam, and you could even get yourself killed in Vietnam.
The alternative.
You're maybe going back to the idea of Henry David Thoreau that the only place for a just man in an unjust society is jail. And we have teachers in our department who went to jail who did not serve in a conflict.
The students transport themselves back a dozen years before they were born to a country they know little of. And like the youths of the 60s, today's teens come to different decisions. To go.
College isn't really an option for us, and there's nothing here. You know, like you might have a minimum wage job, and that's about it. And you know, he's helping out the family by going into the military, and there could be a future in that.
And not to go.
Mark decided that he'd disobey his father and head to Canada with his girlfriend, and face a chance of never being able to come back in the house and not be able in the United States until 1976.
But if the high school students are engaged in the hypothetical,
your behavior, your performance, and your leadership is vitally important to the United States.
In Annapolis, Naval Academy midshipmen contemplate the real consequences of a military life. Marine Major David Fuqua is himself too young to have served in Vietnam, let alone his students.
I guess I feel that, like, my mother, when she was growing up and when her father went off to Vietnam, she had, she really was anti-military.
Wait, your grandfather went to Vietnam?
Yes, sir.
Oh, Sefton, you're making me feel old.
But the major is sure some in this class will see combat. He tells them to study Vietnam so that next time the bullets are flying, they will make the right decision and not the wrong one.
My Lai, one of the most traumatic events out of Vietnam. Americans are going in and wiping out innocent women and children. Whose decision was that, ladies and gentlemen? Fremy.
Wasn't that a second lieutenant?
Second lieutenant. Holy cow. Guess what you guys are going to be in 3.5 years?
The effect it had on us was that the people...
The moral lesson is not lost on the midshipmen. The tactical lesson they must learn. For though they are a generation removed from the Vietnam War, their generation may still carry its burden into battle.
I think until we get into a full-fledged war again, there's always going to be that little cloud over the military of whether or not we'll be able to handle a war like that.
The Gulf War, Desert Storm, was a very different war, and there were few illusions of what it was about. No body counts necessary, no pretense of democratization, and the light at the end of that tunnel shone with pyrotechnic brightness over Baghdad on the first day of combat.
Convoy on the road, 150 troops deploying, 50 cal ammo!
When the Gulf War was over, 100 days later, and Iraq's army routed from Kuwait, President Bush proclaimed Vietnam's epitaph.
It's a proud day for America, and by God, we've kicked Vietnam syndrome once and for all.
Gulf veterans came home to celebrations. Recognition denied Vietnam vets. After Washington's parade, General Fred Franks, who commanded the Army's 7th Corps sweep into Iraq, joined fellow Vietnam veterans at the wall.
I remember talking to some of them, and I said, you know, today was for you too. And they said, we know. Today we felt better than we have for a long time.
Franks was wounded in Cambodia in 1970. Though he lost a leg, he appealed to stay on active duty and made a personal commitment next time would be different. The forces he and the other generals led into the Gulf were.
But our soldiers trained tough, took the fight to the enemy day and night, sandstorms and in the rain.
I'm not sure in how many people's mind there was still a Vietnam War syndrome by the time we went to Desert Storm. It was not in mind.
The military had taken a long, hard look at itself since 1975.
We created something we could never have duplicated with a draft army or military. And the same is true of those who had dire predictions that we would be drawing too much on minorities.
Politicians had to change too. They were no longer fixated by the Cold War. They avoided micromanaging the generals. President Bush's national security advisor, Brent Scowcroft, says they resisted changing the objectives.
Drive them out of Kuwait and destroy their ability to threaten their neighbors, their offensive capability. Once we had done that, we said, the job's over.
Scowcroft says sending troops on an humanitarian mission to Somalia best demonstrated kicking the Vietnam syndrome.
There was no national debate about going into Somalia. It was broadly accepted. We just did it, and the Congress was supportive.
But the mission changed from feeding the Somalis to peacekeeping, to a disastrous manhunt for one of Somalia's warring leaders. As the pictures of starving children drew the U.S. in, the pictures of brutalized Americans sucked the U.S. out.
Somalia was evidence that we haven't kicked the Vietnam syndrome. We have one terrible incident where Rangers lose their lives in Mogadishu, and it's all over.
Senator Kerry, like General Franks, lost a leg in the Vietnam War and received the Congressional Medal of Honor. Kerry thinks the Vietnam syndrome is healthy.
I mean, we are a government of, by, and for the people. We ought not be ashamed of that. We ought to factor that into our deliberations when we make a decision to send young men and women in harm's way.
As U.S. forces go into battle, into harm's way, small armies accompany them. Aggressors for the daily headlines and the evening news. These are the reporters, photographers, camera and sound technicians of the media. For where the military goes, there go we, or at least we try. There were lights, cameras, but little action as U.S. troops came ashore in Somalia. The battle-clad SEAL teams incongruous in a sea of media.
Okay, let's go.
An almost too cooperative Pentagon had tipped off their arrival time, fortunately putting the troops only in the crosshairs of the cameras. Since Vietnam, the military and the media have engaged in their own battle.
Vietnam was the last war to be covered in the World War II Korea tradition, where correspondents were relatively free to roam the battlefield.
When U.S. forces landed on Grenada in 1983, the unwelcome media were kept at bay on other islands in the Caribbean.
I'd love to talk to whoever's in charge. This is ridiculous.
Hold on, sir. We got our orders, okay, sir?
The exclusion created a furor and led to an agreement to allow media pools, small, transportable, and manageable groups of reporters to cover military activities.
What'd you see downtown today?
A lot of people cheering us on.
In Panama in 1989, and especially in the Persian Gulf a year later. It was partly a matter of numbers, media proliferation, not dozens, but hundreds, thousands, and partly a matter of control never exerted in Vietnam.
The Pentagon won 2 wars in the Persian Gulf. It defeated Iraq and it defeated the media.
The air war could only be covered from 2 vantage points, Baghdad.
Again, the pilot released his bomb.
And the briefing room.
The Pentagon entertained the press with these accurate shots of pinpoint bombing and exact death and exact explosion, which later on we learned, in fact, was not the case so much of the time.
Reports from the battlefield were actually few, even in a live TV age.